I was a member of the 503rd Parachute Regimental Combat Team, and we went together to jump school, went through jump school, formed our outfits, went overseas together, served together for 27 months, and came home together. We were together the whole time, not like the Korean and the Vietnam War where we were kept juggled around. I think first I want to tell you about the 503rd. The 503rd is not only unique because it was the first regiment activated in the war back in March of 1942, but because it maintained its unit integrity throughout the entire war until the Japanese surrendered to the 503rd on Negros Island in September of 1945. I know the VJ Day was August 45, but the Japs continued to fight up in the mountains of Negros, and communications were cut off, and they didn't know the war was over. I have my wrong glasses on, I can see that. Anyway, the old television show, Naked City, started out with a line, "There are 8 million stories in the Naked City." Well, there are 3,200 stories in the 503rd. Mine is just one of them. Like a lot of you fellows, I was out of high school in 1941, June, and I couldn't get a job because of the war possibilities. And I told my friends at that time, on the evening of September 7th, the war was going to be one of the biggest things in history, and in my life, and in the life of my friends. And that I wanted to be where the action was. Because if I was going to go to the circus, I wasn't going to go and sit on the outside of the big tent. My quote was that I don't intend to go to the circus and stand on the outside of the big top. I've never regretted joining the Airborne, and I still feel that WW2 was the biggest thing in history, and in my life, and in the life of 3,200 members of the 503rd who are my comrades. During the war, Second World War, a significant number of airborne assaults that were attempted either failed entirely or did not justify the high percentage of casualties that they resulted. A few of them, however, did achieve varying degrees of success. The most successful and perhaps the most spectacular airborne combat assault of the global conflict occurred during the latter stages of the war in the Pacific on the island of Corregidor. The success of that operation offers some lessons that may be valued in the future employment of airborne forces. The island of Corregidor, even before pre-war days, was always called the Rock. It held no value for the Japanese in their defense plans, but until it could be neutralized, it posed a threat to many Allied shipping that might try to enter Manila Bay. Well before the invasion of Luzon, the 6th Army commander, General Walter Kruger, and his G3 section had considered the possibility of capturing the island. As a result, when General Douglas MacArthur informed Kruger of his desire to take Corregidor, by beach or airborne, or by a combination of the two, it took General Kruger's G section only 3 days to come up with a plan. It was to be conducted by elements of the 6th Army, codenamed Rock Force. The 503rd Parachute RCT, Regimental Combat Team, would make a parachute assault. A beach assault would be conducted by the 3rd Battalion of the 34th Infantry and by the 151st Regimental Combat Team. Aircraft of the 317th Troop Carrier Command would transport the airborne forces, while the 592nd Engineer Boat and Shore Regiment would be responsible for the landing of the infantry. This force, the planners believed, would be adequate to deal with the Japanese garrison on Corregidor, which they estimated at no more than 850 to 1,000 men. This turned out to be a significant intelligent error. There were, in fact, more than 6,000 Japanese on the island. To the planners, the island of Corregidor looked like a tadpole, and you have a picture there, and it does look like a tadpole, with an oversized head facing out east of the bay. The widest point measured 1.5 miles. The total length of the island was about 3.5 miles.
Did I show that picture of Manila Bay?
Yes.
Have you given us the date you're talking about, or the return, the airdrop of 1945? I didn't hear you say exactly what day when it returned.
It was February the 16th.
1945.
What are we looking at?
Corregidor in the mouth of the bay.
Right here. No.
Yeah.
Middle Bay. What's the A here, Don?
I don't know from the talk that was on. I think that's over on the side. Spearheaded by the paratrooper soldiers of the 11th Corps landed on Corregidor A.
They just didn't hear it, they could get to the island. They didn't superimpose the A on the island itself. That's all. They didn't want to block out the island.
Manila was back at the other end of the bay, 25 miles
The guy that came in that didn't even need the A.
No. Okay.
They did the job.
The planners wanted to use the airborne forces to obtain surprise. So they made two assumptions. One, the Japanese, having taken the rock themselves by a beach assault in 1942, would not expect an airborne invasion. And the enemy, scanning the sea approaches from the underground bunkers, probably would be distracted by the approach of the beach force and would not see the paratroopers in time to react to them. The selection of the drop zones then became of primary importance. Colonel George M. Jones, who commanded the 503rd, after making an aerial flight, recommended Kindly Field. Now we can look at the other map that shows Kindly Field.
The pointer over there.
Right.
No,
Got that long peninsula.
Way out to the right. Up high.
Near the tip.
Yeah. Right in the middle.
right in the middle.
Right there. His glasses aren't right.
Kindly Field, right here. Well, you can see Kindly Field is in a bad spot because there's nothing on either side. There was no territory worth fighting for. And if you took Kindly Field and wanted to take the rest of the island, you had to go through Melinta Tunnel, or Melinta Hill, and there's the path right there. And that's where all the Japanese were with their ammunition dumps. That turned out to be a bad pick. In fact, Colonel Jones was vetoed by General Kruger. And General Kruger said that besides troops landing there would draw as much fire if they had come from the sea. The other way to achieve surprise therefore, was to land the troops on topside. Topside,
Right in the middle.
right in the middle. Land the troops on topside. But steep cliffs on the south and west bordered the area, and a strong or shifting wind would bring the paratroopers onto the cliffs or into the sea below. The advantages of landing on topside outweighed the disadvantages, though, and the parade ground was designated DZA and the golf course DZB. The troops of the first drop were to secure and hold both DZs in preparation for the second drop, which the additional troopers, they would have, with these additional troopers, they would then clear topside, provide cover for the beach assault, and then establish contact with the 3rd Battalion of the 34th Infantry. The entire force would then conduct mopping operations. On February the 16th, the C-4s of the 317th Troop Carrier Command rose from the airfields on Mindoro, circled, and then headed in a wide westerly sweep north to Corregidor. A half hour later, a second flight followed, bringing the total to 51 aircraft. At 8:30, the first wave of aircraft was ordered to proceed with the drop. 2 columns of C-47s, one for each drop zone, flew on a course from southwest to northeast, and the V formation used in the flight from Mindoro broke into an in-trail formation. Aircraft trailed at 600 feet apart at a speed of 100 miles per hour. 650 feet above topside. Given that speed, each aircraft had only 10 seconds over its designated drop zone, a time that did not allow all of the troopers to exit in one pass. This meant that each plane had to make 3 passes, releasing a stick of 6 to 8 men each time. Because of the prevailing winds over the bay, the jumpers could not use the prearranged go count when the green light flashed on. Instead, the pilots counted seconds after passing the go point before they turned on the green light. The airborne assault came as a complete surprise to the Japanese. The first troopers drew no fire at all. Minutes later, and only scattered rifle and machine gun fire met the second drop. Colonel Jones had assembled the men at the top of the first drop. They had 3 missions. One was to secure the drop zones, prepare to secure topside after being reinforced by the second drop, and establish positions to provide supporting fire for the infantry landing on Black Beach. Going back to General Kruger's decision, it undoubtedly prevented a disaster. For the Japanese commander on Corregidor had heavily mined Conley Field, had heavy weapons zeroed in on it in anticipation of a possible parachute attack, and had more than 3,000 Imperial Marines on mid-side and on topside, plus an additional 3,000 troops in Melinda Tunnel. The Japanese commander, watching the amphibious fleet, but neglecting the air, had taken his aides to the southern edge of topside near Breakwater Point. Suddenly, a couple of dozen paratroopers began pelting the area in and around his observation point. The aggressive troopers attacked, killing the Jap commander and most of his staff, and captured his wounded aide. In the early mornings hour of the 4th day, we had already killed over 3,000 Japs, and in the early mornings of the 4th day, the Japs exploded one of their underground arsenals directly under one of the 503rd Company command posts. The explosion caused some casualties to the troopers, but in doing so, the Japs had killed a large number of their own. Immediately after the explosion, 30 or more Japs paid a hurried call to their honorable ancestors by forming a large circle and committing mass hara-kiri, with detonation of hand grenades held to their bellies. As though one of the Japs gave a signal of some kind, all of the grenades went off at the same time. The initial explosion might have been a signal because just before the Japs emerged in force from underground quarters on Wheeler Point, more than 400 Japs participated in a banzai charge that, had it been successful, might have well changed the tide of the rock battle in their favor. A few Japs made their way through the outer perimeter, and that was as far as they got. The planned and coordinated ruin of the enemy continued unabated for the next 3 days, and the enemy casualties rose well over 4,000. Remaining Japs were unable to organize, resisted bitterly in each cave, coming out only at night in small groups to infiltrate into the lines, to toss a few hand grenades, or to placed landmines in the trail of the battalion CPs. 2 nights later, another explosion again rocked the whole Ireland and blew out the southwest slope of Malinta Hill. The entire section of the main tunnel had been set off and was completely burned out. The blast, apparently from a powder magazine and not demolitions, for the island seemed to give a shudder, then a dull roaring sound, and flames enveloped the entire hill, reaching upward more than 300 feet. The 34th Doughboys, by clinging tenaciously to their positions on top of the hill, suffered heavily from the blast. More than 200 Japs rushed out of the other tunnel entrances into the muzzles of the 34th's machine guns, who had remained in their position in the face of the intense heat of the blast. The Japs trying to escape were killed to the man. On topside, Wheeler Point was cleaned out again and again and again by paratroopers, only to find that the Japs had reoccupied the caves and tunnels from underground. At the same time, the 34th Infantrymen were kept busy cleaning the tunnels on Malinta Hill and ambushing sizable parties of Japs slipping out of the entrances in an effort to escape to the east end of the island. The Japs' final effort against the paratroopers on topside came in the morning of February the 23rd, when an estimated force of more than 400 attacked in a desperate attempt to break out. In the bloody battle that followed, most of the enemy met their end, and the attack was repulsed. On the 25th of February, the 3rd Battalion of the 34th Infantry was relieved, bringing them to the end of some 5 months of continuous combat on Leyte, Bataan, and Corregidor. We were losing the very best of hard, tough troops. Without their hanging determination effort during the operation, we would have suffered severely without them. And so it goes on and on. The Japs kept self-destructing every night. There was always some kind of an explosion where the Japanese were trying to overrun our forces. But in the end, we did beat them, and I was very glad to be out of there when it was over. Thank you.
Sam, you told us a story about the Dr.
Spicer.
Yes.
Yes.
Sure would be
On the first day, we had a tough day, first day. We lost our 2 chaplains. Chaplain Herb he broke his leg and ended up with the worst break of the whole campaign. He was evacuated the next day in a cast from his ankle up to his neck. Father Powers was shot on the way down, and when he landed, he broke several ribs. He also was evacuated. In the same afternoon, we lost 2 of our surgeons. One with a broken leg had to be evacuated. And Captain Spicer, after reporting to regimental headquarters, aid station, went back to his own aid station, and on the way back, he was shot in the chest. He knew it was bad, and he sat down, wrote out his own death certificate, took a shot of morphine, laid down, and to await death. And the only thing on the death certificate was the time of death. The day and his rank were all on there. That was it.
Pardon? What was his rank?
Did you have a rank?
I was a corporal.
Okay.
Lieutenant corporal.
All right. One thing you mentioned earlier was how the makeup for the 503rd. You had 3 different groups in it. Can you tell us a little about that?
It was the 503rd Regiment, the parachute regiment. I was a member of the 462nd Parachute Field Artillery Battalion, and we had one company, Company C, of the 161st Parachute Engineers, and we formed together and we became the 503rd.
Okay.
What can you tell us about the actual man-to-man combat relative to the Japanese being in the caves, and what was necessary in order to get them out of it?
Well, we had had 75 millimeter pack howitzers, and they were on wheels, and we could adjust them, wheel them wherever we wanted to, point blank into the caves. Also, the engineers were there and the infantry with flamethrowers. The flamethrowers did it. We had over 1,000 dead Japanese, and the stench was so bad that they had to come in with C-47s and spray BTT. They were afraid of disease from the flies. The flies would feast on those corpses. And then at night, even at night they bit, you know, and they were afraid of disease setting in. But the 75 millimeter howitzers did a nice job. We could focus it right above a cave, and all the debris would roll down. But then they must have had machinery inside. They cleaned them right out again. The next day you had to go back over and over and over again and clean out the caves and the tunnels. It kept them busy, really.
There's another question for you. We spoke about a rather large number of the Japs committed Harry, I guess within a short period of days. My question is about how many days after the initial attack on American airdrop did the Japs come to the conclusion they were going to commit Harry?
Well, it was early.
Pretty early, about like within a week or
I'd say 3 or 4 days.
4 days.
They started these individual. After they lost their commander, the Japanese commander, they had been told by the officers that there was a force of 8,000 American paratroopers, but we were only 3,200 strong when we were.
They figured the jig was up right there.
Right. They knew they were fighting a losing battle. And they committed Harry Carey. There is, the gentleman back there, did you go to Suicide Cliff when you went back at Corregidor?
There was a suicide cliff on the north coast of Saipan.
And there was a suicide cliff on Corregidor where the Japs just went hurling themselves over. Like the fellow from the Navy that was in here the last time talked about being disgraced. You just didn't just surrender. I mean, and if you were laying dying, another Japanese would shoot them just to make sure that they never gave out information. But they saw the writing after 3 or 4 days. We were on there for 11 days. And water became important. They were dropping water. The temperature was 110 degrees on Corregidor at that time. And it was coral based.
In February?
Well, see, they're down under. It's like going to Australia. The equator. We weren't too far from the equator. And that sun was, tropical sun beating down on that coral made it even hotter. And the smell of the dead bodies was just terrible. And the people who were in charge of tagging the bodies, there were so many Japanese, and they never left any identification on their body. If they had pictures of their family, they would chew them and swallow them.
They used to burn some of the corpses and put them in jars, the ashes.
Yes. They're very, very superstitious people.
Well, they're right. Fanatical. I mean, pictures of whether they're kamikazes and suicide cliffs and Harry and all that.
Where did the Air Force fly in from?
Where they fly from? In Medora. The airstrip's on Medora. In the Philippines.
Yeah.
I read a book called Corregidor by Lieutenant General Flanagan, and it mentioned everything.
What was the writer's name?
Lieutenant General Flanagan.
Flanagan. Did you read that book, Don? Flanagan's book?
No.
He was very thorough. Covered everything. He mentioned over, I believe it was at Monkey Point.
Monkey
There was
Point.
a lot of paint and artillery activity, especially in the constant machines there. And evidently there was one explosion that was just tremendous. One killed good number of men, and even I think Colonel Jones captured a Japanese plane, Japanese jeep, and he wanted to somehow get back to the States.
That was Monkey Point. That was our final destination.
Were you there?
Yes. Well, I was on topside with our artillery. We had our 75 millimeter howitzers lined up supporting the infantry when the Japs blew up Monkey Point. lifted a 30-ton tank and carried it 50 yards, destroyed it completely. We had 3 men killed on that day. 3 men killed that day with boulders. I mean, boulders that you couldn't put your arms around. And that was a good mile and a quarter, mile and a half away from where we had our artillery line up. They had been stockpiling Corregidor ever since 1942 with food and ammunition. And they had these tunnels and caves just loaded with machine gun bullets and ammunition and what have you.
You were with the artillery, right?
I was with the artillery.
Wasn't about half of the artillery damaged when you parachuted? I read something about 2 of them were damaged on impact, and a couple of others were like 12 feet above it or something like that.
Well, see,
You only ended up with
our 75 millimeter howitzers are, you're able to disassemble them, and they're put in crates, and they're loaded at to the bottom of the C-47. You make a pass over the target, you drop your equipment, and they're multicolored chutes. You know, you don't want to, if you're a battery, you're looking for red chutes when you hit the ground. You don't want to pick up a green chute or a yellow chute because you're going to end up with 2 parts, and the other guy's going to end up with a part short. So you went for your own colored parachute. You got your, we could assemble a 75 millimeter howitzer in less than 5 minutes. So I don't remember reading, or I don't remember.
One. It was 2 of the artillery that were under such intense fire that you couldn't get to. And the other 2 were damaged, and there were like 4 or 5 left. So you were short.
I'm not aware of that.
No.
I'll have to read his book.
Yeah.
Here's another question. How many months after the Battle of Leyte Gulf was this invasion? Just 2 or 3 months later, or I forget the exact date?
I don't know.
Lady was invaded the 20th of October.
October, so you had November, December, January,
And
February.
after that, they went up to Lingayen Gulf, which was north of Luzon, and then came to Corregidor.
So that was about 4 months later.
Well, it took a little while. This is from the beginning landing on Lady. It took some while to.
There's a lot of mopping up of all the MacArthur wanted to do all through the Philippines. It's too bad a lot of those other mopping up on the other islands didn't go anywhere near as effectively as this action.
This book, Crisis in the Pacific, the first half of it is the Japanese occupying the island and our troops surrendering, and the Bataan Death March. And then the rest of it, I was going to stop it, just primarily I wanted to read that part, but I got a couple of paragraphs into starting back and I haven't been able to stop it. I'm almost finished with it now. But once they landed in Leyte Gulf, or at Leyte, there was a lot of fighting going on there, and next month, the Battle of Ormoc Bay was 3 destroyers that were sent around the other side of the island to stop the Japanese from reinforcing their troops on Leyte. And one of the destroyers was sunk, and the other 2 had to make a quick exit. And so they really didn't exactly win there, but they did deter the Japanese, and they turned around and cut short on bringing people in.
The light destroyer escort was sunk in that.
Was it? That was
USS
Cuba.
Chaffee, 230.
Oh,
DE-230. Fortunately, it landed on a coral reef. It took an aerial torpedo through the bosun's locker. And down she went, but she landed on a coral reef and all hands on everything.
that was not the Battle of Ormoc Bay,
No,
was
it
it?
was
No.
Lingayen Gulf.
Okay, so there's a lot of action there that we're going to hear more about. I had intended to get some books selected from the library and put on display here. I'd urge you, if you have any interest in what you're hearing about here, to the book and read about it between now and next month.
There's a book upstairs, there's only one copy, and I donated it to the library. One of the fellows in our outfit wrote this book. It's called 3 Winds of Death. It was the 3 combat jumps that the 503rd had in the Pacific. Port Moresby, the island of Noonfor in Dutch New Guinea, and Corregidor. But going back to that Monkey Point explosion,
Yes.
debris from that explosion landed on a destroyer 2,000 miles out at sea. 2,000 yards. I just wanted to see if you were awake.
That's about as much.
Military Hill right in here. And they essentially blew up the hill.
They blew one whole side of the hill out. But if it hadn't been really, this was a team effort. It's just not the 503rd. That the 3rd Battalion of the 34th Infantry, and they had 3 titles. They were the 3rd Battalion of the 34th Infantry of the 24th Division. But if it hadn't been for those fellas, they really pulled us out of a lot of jams. And we have some of those fellows come to our 503rd reunions, and they're just happy to be with us. Don, I'm going to have to leave.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to I have to be down in the hospital.
Okay.
My wife's in the hospital.
I'd like, thanks very much for coming in spite of your difficulties. It looked like we might have to have an alternate speaker, and I had arranged a backup speaker. The April talk was going to be tonight, but fortunately Sam was able to make it, and we thank you very much for coming.
Can I ask you one more question?
See you.
There it goes.
See you, George.
Before we can get on to some other discussion of similar topics, we've got, say, 45 minutes yet, and there's no sense in wasting it. But part of the routine of the library is I need to fill out a slip that tells the number of people attending according to age group. And so I'm going to have to ask each of you your age. Actually, I don't think we have any.
Between 70 and 75.
I don't think. Do we have any preschoolers here, 1 to 5? I don't think so. I'll put a 0 there. How about elementary, 6 to 13? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Wonderful. 6. How about high school, 14 to 18? No, high school. Okay, so I've counted 46 people. I'm going to say...
That's junior high and senior high.
Yeah, okay, I'm going to count the rest of us as adults.
Oh, you're not going to get down 30 to 40, 40 to 50, 50 to 60, 70, 80.
I need to have your birthday for everybody. I had wanted Sam to make brief mention of it, but one of the other points that they were on was Negros Island in the Philippines, and he had given me 6 photographs that had a heading written on the back side of it by the person that took the picture, and I took the heading that he had and made a title down at the bottom of each picture, and you might want to look them over. There is a picture of a couple of guys standing by a Jap fighter plane on Negros Island. The reason the plane was on the ground there was because they had run out of fuel. And part of the reason they ran out of fuel was because our submarines were pretty effective at
The latter part of the war.
yeah, and so they were just running out of food and fuel. And there's pretty gory stories about things that Japanese were eating and some of the stuff that I read in the book here. The other pictures on here are showing Japanese coming from the hills with white flags surrendering and ultimately leading them out. And the last picture shows the Japanese surrendering their swords to Americans at the surrender ceremony on Negros Island in the Philippines. And Al, how about it? Would you want to mention what you've got related to this? Al Finkus.
Thank you. Don asked me to bring it, but I thought I'd use it in my own when it comes to my own story. But what happened was I was on a landing ship medium, LSM. It was called. It was LSM 472. And we were in every single island, call us island hoppers, Saipan, Tinian, Guam, etc., right up to Japan. And on the day the war ended and the peace treaty was signed, we were ordered to take over a seaplane, Japanese seaplane base on a little outlying island called Wakanura. And the LSM only has about 54 crew members and 6 officers. It's a small ship with a flat bottom. Most of us lost our stomachs before we even got there, because the ship just, that's what it does all day long. Anyway, the captain was Captain Barnes. I'll never forget this. And he was 27 or 29 years old. I was 20, 21. And I was electrician's mate first class. And one of my duties was to open the bow doors and lower the ramp and let we had sometimes Marines and sometimes soldiers, and let them off. And so as soon as the thing was over, Captain Barnes was gung-ho. He was from Florida, from Tallahassee, Florida. And he was, you might almost say, wow, he wanted a fight. We would always get there, drop our stern anchor, hit the beach, the soldiers would get off, the Marines would get off, and we'd pull back. And of course there was all things going on, but it wasn't as bad as the guys that were on shore. And he was always frustrated about this. So when he got the order to hit the beach, he said, "Men, we're going to hit the beach." And what he didn't know was that when you have these seaplanes, the ramp that goes up is made of cement usually, because they have to pull these things up. He didn't realize that, and he hit that beach so hard that I thought the ship would just fall apart. It shuddered after we had dropped the stern anchor. And then everything grew quiet. And we all had our helmets on, and I used to wear earphones, and the captain would talk to me from the conning tower, and I was handling the cutler hammer controls that would open the bow doors and lower the ramp. And he said, "Sparks." Every electrician's mate in the Navy is called Sparks. "Sparks, open bow doors." "Aye, aye, sir." And I opened the bow doors. And then he said, "Lower the ramp." Very serious. And I lowered the ramp. Now, when you lower the ramp, you have to be very careful that it doesn't hit rocks or something, because then the jeeps and the soldiers, they fall. The jeep would get hung up. You could really louse up the operation. So I always used to bend down and make sure everything was smooth so that the ramp would go right down on the ground. So we had a complement of soldiers, and they weren't too excited. The war was over. Had their guns and everything. And I'm down there making sure that everything is smooth, and the captain can't see me. And he says, "Hey, Sparks, are you there?" I said, "Yes, Captain." He said, "When you come up very slowly. There's a Japanese commander standing in front of you with a sword in his hand and a bunch of soldiers with guns." Here I am, 20 years old, and I'm from Brooklyn, no less. And I said, "Captain, do you think he knows the war's over?" He said, "Beats me, so be careful." So I come up very slowly, and as soon as I come up, he's as close to me as you are, and he had his Sunday best uniform on. It was and he had this beautiful sword in his hand, and about 30 or 40 sailors behind him with guns. They had rifles. There wasn't a sound. And our men were standing right behind me, at the head of the ramp. And nobody said a word. Nobody knew what to do. And it was like silence, and I was in the middle of it. There I was standing there looking at this guy. He was looking at me. I never was that close to one before. And suddenly, it seemed like an eternity, but it was only a couple of seconds. And he said, "Konnichiwa. That's good day to you, sir." And he handed me the sword. And I says, "Hey, Sparks." I said, "Yes, Captain." He says, "Take it, stupid, he's surrendering." As soon as I took the sword, they all dropped their guns and they assumed the position, and the soldiers came running off and they took over. And then the captain said to the whole crew, "Everybody who wants one, take a rifle home." And he said, "Sparks, he surrendered to you So you're the hero of the day, you can keep the sword, and I still have it. I was 52 years ago. I spoke to Don, I was gonna bring it, but it's not my turn to give the whole talk. I'm gonna bring it.
But you could put in a commercial right now for the Alpinka's
Oh, yes.
Historical Museum.
I do have I'm a lover of the Navy. I never was on a rowboat before the Second World War. And when I joined the Navy, I was not out of high school, I was still in high school. And so I really did love it, and it really got hold of me, and they offered to keep me in the Navy and send me to Officers Candidate School to be an engineering officer. But I hadn't been home for over 2 years, and my father was ill, and I wanted to get home, so I didn't do that. But what happened was, when I did get home, I went to, this is funny, I went to college, and I finished high school, went to college and law school under the GI Bill. God bless America. I never would have been able to afford it. And when I became a lawyer, I asked to join the Navy again. I wanted to be a JAG officer, and you know, as a Navy lawyer. And then the Korean War broke out, and they weren't interested in lawyers. They wanted line officers, and I had enough. I wasn't going to be a line officer. So that ended that. But because of my time in the Navy, I collected artifacts, and I have a little museum in my barn. I also collect automobiles, so I have a lot of them. The barn's big. And we have antique automobiles, and we have a little corner that's all the museum. And I have such things as the samurai sword and the rifle and a lot of other things from the Navy. An interesting thing that I have that you might want to come and see is I have the sextant. You know what that is? Yes. You shoot the sun, it's a navigational instrument. I have the sextant from the submarine that saved President George Bush when his plane was shot down in 1944. He was on a run to the Bonin Islands, and a bombing run, and they shot him down, and up comes the submarine and picked him up. And that submarine was sunk in the closing days of the war. But all hands were saved with the Munson lung, and they all got the Navy Cross for having sunk the most Japanese shipping, the most enemy shipping in the entire war.
What was the name of the sub again? Sub's name again?
It was the Finback, USS Finback. They always named them in those days, after they weren't atomic submarines, they named them after fish. USS Finback, number 230. And I had a special feel for that because my destroyer escort was the USS Chaffee, DE 230. So anyway, I have documentation from President Bush, he's my pen pal, because of this, and telling us the whole story. And then I got a letter from the commander, who was the captain of that vessel, Commander Williams, who lives in Pensacola, Florida, still alive, and he confirmed to me that I have the only artifact from that ship because it's on the bottom of the Sea of Japan. I shouldn't say ship, it's called a boat. And how I got it was, they left it in Pearl Harbor for repairs and took a spare. I don't know what happened to it then, but I bought it in a junkyard, in a junk shop, you know, one of these flea markets. And I didn't know what it was, whose it was when I bought it. But later on, when President Bush ran for vice president the first time, they had a little film clip of his plane getting shot down. He lands in the water in a rubber raft, and up comes a submarine, and you see on the conning tower, 230. So I sit up right in bed, and I said to my wife, "My God, it's my submarine!" And she said, "There you go again." So I said, "Well, I'm going to prove it. I'm going to write to the vice president." I wrote him, I got back a this letter from him, which is framed and hangs over the thing. And then he started to write to me and tell me about Commander Williams, and Commander Williams wrote to me, and the walls in my museum are full of these letters. So, and the last one being this past September, October, when he was here for the summit. And I invited him to come stay with us. And he wrote me a lovely letter and said, "I can't do it, but could you send me a picture of the museum?" Because he had sent me pictures of himself and his wife and so on. And And I sent him the pictures, and he wrote back again, he said, one of these days, you might get a surprise. So that's it. But anyway, anybody who would like to see the museum, you're absolutely welcome at any time. You know, retired guys get very lonesome. I'd love to see people come over.
And where are you?
I live at 1440 Pineville Road. And that's, yeah, Pineville Road. The address is actually New Hope, but it's not New Hope. If you know Peddler's Village, you know that? Well, if you come to Peddler's Village, that's Court Street Road. And you would make a right turn there and come down about a mile, there's Pineville Road. And we're just up a little ways on Pineville Road, there's a little sign outside that says Cold Spring Farm.
That's hard to
1440.
do. Yeah.
It's not New Hope, no, it's New Hope Post
Before you
Office,
get
but
to New Hope.
it's really Buckingham.
Yeah.
Anyway, we have 16 classic cars, which last summer won 15 medals, 15 trophies. So, and then we have the museum. So it's worth the trip. There's no charge, and you're always welcome. And if you do come and I'm in the mood, I might even make you coffee. If you're a sailor, you're home free, you know?
You say just after you get through Peddler's Village, you take a right.
You take a right, and the next intersection is Pineville Road. You make a right on Pineville, it's a half mile down, and there it is. So I'm always there, and if you want to call me first to make sure that you don't make a trip for nothing, the telephone number is 598-0882. And I'll give you a tour that will probably take about 2 hours. Because there's a lot to see in between the cars. And if it's summertime, I'll take you for a ride in one of the old cars. Okay. Thank you.
A little,
Yeah.
a little different, Frank Williams,
215.
could you tell us just briefly a little bit about what we've got up front here? This is not a prepared talk, I don't think.
Yeah, that's true.
My name is Frank Williams. I was not in World War II. My father and my father-in-law were. My father was in the Pacific in Saipan, Philippines. My father-in-law was with the 84th Infantry Division in Battle of Bulge thereafter. Ever since I was 6 years old, I've been building plastic models. I'm still building them, now I'm running a voyage with them. My specialty area is U.S. military 1939 to 1940, 1939 to 1945, World War II. This particular talk, Mr. Lee asked me to bring, he asked me if I had a C-47. The closest I could come was a Navy R-4D from the 1950s. It's the same airplane, just different paint color. The other gun up on top is a Japanese self-propelled gun that came out late in the war in the 1944 era. I have about 40 more of these at home, and if anyone is interested, I can bring a couple more over the next couple of lectures. And every one of my models, I don't build. In addition to building, I read everything I can get my hands on. That book after that. Or I always find something in the book that I say, I can make a model of that. So every one of my models has a history of names of the people, if I can get them, the names of the people who were in the scene, where the scene was, what the piece of equipment is, how it fought, the history of it. You know, I've got it all written down, I've got a whole catalog in here. So, I mean, if there's interest, I can keep bringing them. And these are the ones I have today.
Okay, thank you. The main purpose of the talks as I envisioned them when we started was I wanted to hear people tell their story of what they did. Now, Sam was rather modest, and he said, I was no hero, and he concentrated on saying, here's what the 503rd did. And I tried to coach him to say, here's what I did, here's what we did. And I got a little bit more of that into it. The first time I heard him, which was at our church men's breakfast, you almost wouldn't have known that he was in it, because he researched it, he wanted to make sure he had all the facts right, and he quoted from the books, and it was interesting, but after he finished and he started talking and answering questions, then it was more, I guess, real is the way I would
Well,
put
it's
it.
interesting, his presentation, because just as well, just like he answered questions, given the whole thing just extemporaneous
Yeah.
personal account, which
Yeah.
would have made it more personal, but he had prepared a
Yeah.
paper which he read word for word.
Yeah.
So it's made it a little more impersonal than this.
Yeah, so, it's, I know he had to leave early, he really wasn't sure if he was coming, his wife went in, took her into emergency yesterday morning, and she's in the hospital with some, tests, and apparently they found today that she's gonna be all right, it's just, touch and go a little bit. Some kind of gastrointestinitis or something or other. Anyhow, it would have been nice if he had been able to stay around and talk some more, because the talk after his talk is as interesting as the talk was. One thing is, I see Russ, you're over here. Russ is the guy that has loaned me this book, right?
Yeah.
He also has another one I haven't read yet that was written by another guy about their activities. And so next month we're going to hear things about the USS Mole. Would you care to spend 2 minutes telling us what you're going to tell us about?
Sure. The Mole is a new 2,200-ton destroyer that was built. It came off Kearney Ways in February. Brooklyn Navy Yard, arrived in the Pacific area around October. We took part in invasions at Ormoc Bay, Mindoro, Iwo Jima, Luzon, and pickup stations at Okinawa. The ship had 6 5-inch 38 guns, rifles, 12 40 millimeter, 2 quads and 3 twins, and 10 20 millimeter or 40 millimeter machine guns, 10 torpedo tubes, ash cans for submarines, K guns, plus you roll 2 and fire 2, set up a pattern as you went over the sub. But that's about what I'll be talking about next. And of course, we went to Tokyo Bay after the war. As a matter of fact, we were in there before the war was over, harassing, firing a sailboat occasionally. But there's quite a lot to tell, and I have it all. I have some notes made, and I'll try to make it as interesting as possible. I won't try not to keep it too long, but I'm going to tell you about 13 months in this, what, an hour?
Yeah.
So I've got to speed it up. I've got to compress it and give you all of the interesting facts that I know about as a member of the, I was a radar man, as a matter of fact, when the USS Mole, DD 693, Squadron 60, Division 120.
Okay.
And I'll see you all next month, hopefully.
And another thing I'd like to get out of the talks here is leads for future talks. I've got talks scheduled through June. I have 1 or 2 potentials. For instance, I don't know if it's any good, and I want to check it out before we do it, but we have over at Gloria Day Farms, I understand a German who was in the German Army. He was captured. He was a prisoner of war in the United States, or by the U.S., and I want to find out if his story is, that's a different point of view, I guess, of the war. We don't want to get completely a one-sided war.
Alan Okamoto.
Alan, you beat me to it. Are you Alan Okamoto?
Oh, no, I'm not.
You're not.
He's my friend.
Okay.
He was in the Japanese battalion that fought in Europe.
Okay. Can you give us a brief rundown on who he was? Because he has indicated that he would talk to us.
After the war, he married Yoni Okamoto, another Japanese woman who had been in the prison camps that they made up out west. But before that, he went in, he was drafted, he was put into the Japanese battalion that they didn't want the Japanese to fight against the And they were used as cannon fodder, in effect, in some respect, because of the fact that they were Japanese, and there was a little bit of that.
To some degree, Japanese were second-class citizens or third or fourth-class citizens in the U.S. at that time.
But they're the most decorated.
And they did a good job.
Yeah, there was a movie made about it. It's just forget the title now, but occasionally it's on television. All about the whole story.
The title was Go for Broke.
Go for Broke
Which
was called.
was
That's right.
the Italian motto.
So there's two after the June talk.
Are you looking for topics?
Pardon?
Are you looking for particular topics?
I'm looking for topics, but primarily people who were there to tell it. We've got one guy that was at an earlier meeting here who has offered to, he's sort of a naval historian, and he's offered to, he said, you pick the topic and I'll talk on it. I said, that's not what I'm looking for. I want you to talk about what you did, not what you researched in a book somewhere.
Would you want to include, if you didn't do it yourself, you have a close friend who is great on writing Navy history, World War II and Pacific, where he has written well-written papers.
Yeah.
He's had published, like there's a organization called the Guadalcanal Club and so on, and he's written.
I think if we
And
run
all I
out,
could do there is read his
Yeah.
paper.
I think if we run out of first-hand accounts and you still want to hear more, we can probably get into some of those. But there's enough first-hand accounts still around that that's what I'm trying to get
The
now.
speaker himself.
And since we videotape them and put them into the library, another thing I'm looking for is to get some help, and it may be financial help, to get some professional editing to help with titles and dubbing or whatever you do to tapes to make them quality tapes, rather than just the raw tapes of videotaping the talk. And so that's something else we need. You had a
1988 to 1994, I was teaching English in mainland China. While I was there, I became aware of the Japanese 731 project, which did their bacteriological research and on germ warfare and also on resistance to environmental factors. They killed perhaps 30,000 Chinese, 4 dozen Russians, 2 dozen British, and at least 12 Americans in their grizzly experiments. And I was then selected in, I guess it was New Year's night of 1989. I was selected from a group of people to act in a television documentary being made by the Chinese government about this whole project. And it gives some interesting insights as to what was going on. Because it was 1989, they were just ready to film on the middle of May 1989, and then Tiananmen Square occurred a week. I came back again quickly, but
that period, though, of time that you were studying about was what period?
well, I was in China from 1998 to 1994. What?
No, not 98.
What this was in 1932 to 1945.
Okay, so it covered that World War II period.
Yeah.
That might be interesting, and I'd like to get your name and information on it. I can keep it in the files here. Anything else that somebody else would like to offer or to ask or to get some
Well,
discussion?
I'd like to say, you mentioned this book, Crisis in the Pacific, and yet you root beer than anyone not inspired to read more about World War II shakedown in the Pacific. I can say that this library has an excellent collection of books. I've read 15 or 20 of them just on World War II and Pacific, and haven't begun to exhaust them. So you don't have to only highlight one book, maybe in a reason for featuring
Well,
that, but you could pick any one in the bookshelf of 40 or
Right.
50 books upstairs, and you could get very engrossed in.
I had made arrangements, and it fell through, for me to bring a bag of books down here, and I can set them up. Anybody that
Yeah.
all in a row, right
Yeah, but-
together, one line.
But this way, we've got a captive audience, and somebody might pick it up and read it here, where you won't take the trouble to go to
Oh,
the
that's
bookshop.
too bad, they're not gonna be that interested in reading.
Okay,
the first
well, I
one.
don't know if there's anything else that we need to.
An interesting book that I have, a friend gave it to me from Washington, D.C. It does the name me on Destroyer in the European theater. Because everything has been on the Pacific theater, you'll see. So I spent 30 months in the Mediterranean. But this one book is called Blood on the Sea. And it's about 67 U.S. destroyers that were sunk in the Second World War in Europe and in the Pacific. This is just sunk. I was not talking about ones that were hit or anything like that. And it's an amazing story. It's a story on every one of them and what they have gone through. It's called Blood on the Sea. Is there anybody coming up on the European theater on any naval operations or?
The March talk is by Bob Miller on Soldier Story, so it's called. He went into Normandy D-Day 100 plus 100 and was in Patton's army, but he was wounded slightly just before the Battle of the Bulge, which might have saved him from participating in the Battle of the Bulge. He was then back into the army, into the group, and went into Germany, and through Germany to a number of cities there, and was all prepared to go to back to the U.S. for training for going to the Pacific Theater when the war ended. So that's a soldier story, but there's a lot more stories to have if I can just find them and pull them out. So that's where I need help.
No, the only thing I talk about is like in the Mediterranean, see, the United States, the biggest thing we had over there was the light cruisers, the Boise, the Philly, the Brooklyn, and Savannah. And Savannah got hit and was taken out of action. Destroyers were the main action of anything.
Well, you were in some of those. You were a destroyer.
The ship that I was on was in all European.
Okay.
I only made 3. I made Anzio, Normandy, and southern France. But the ship had
And his
been
name.
Yeah. Can I have your name and phone number before you leave?
With Anzio, we got hit and lost 53 men with the fire around. And then we had to come back and get repaired.
You're one of the people that I'm looking for.
The workhorse of the place was, of the U.S. Navy, was the destroyer. And we were just those 2-stack broken decker, 1,600 tonners. I wish I was on one of those
Okay.
2200s.
Can I get your name and phone number? Okay. All right. I guess that's about all I know. It looks like that's it. Here's some pictures if you'd like to look them over.